in Morocco, the dollar will cost you 90 rand 23. Angola 911 kwanza. The Congolese franc is at 2,130 to the US dollar. Commodities, gold is at $4,668, platinum at $2,356 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil at $63.71 a barrel. That is all from me. For any stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chad.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
And for the latest sport business news, here is Mosibuti Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you so much, Thami. Very good afternoon from the Sports Test. So the Confederation of African Football said it had a 90% increase in commercial revenue for the Africa Cup of Nations tournament in Morocco, calling it the most successful commercial story in the history of African football, but without providing any figures. Now, CAF said this was because of the increase in commercial partners, as well as media rights distribution and venturing into new markets, most notably in Asia. Now, the growth has been matched by a steady expansion of the sponsor portfolio, with the number of commercial partners now increasing from 9 during the 2021 tournament to 17 at the finals in the Ivory Coast in 2023. With the 2025 edition in Morocco having concluded last night, CAF has continued to attract more partners and now has 23 sponsors. This expansion reflects both the attraction of new global brands as well as the retention of existing partners for whom the AFCON has been excellent, had rather an excellent run on a return on investment. Meanwhile, in its financial statements released at the Congress late last year, CAF said it had an income of about $96 million in net contract revenues for the last Africa Cup of Nations tournament. Meanwhile, when the AFCON 4-year cycle decision was introduced at the beginning of the tournament this month, Motsepe revealed that they would also introduce the African Nations League from 2028 that will be held annually and also help close the revenue gap following changes to AFCON hosting. He repeated these earlier statements that the African Nation League could also fare better revenue-wise than the AFCON tournament.
Has significantly increased the African Champions League, the club football, and made that significantly better. We've increased the Confederations Cup prize money competition. We spent $30 million, which has never happened, gave money to each one of those clubs. And so we are satisfied.
Further afield now, Arsenal generated the most revenue of any women's football club in 2025. That's according to analysis by Deloitte. The 2025 Champions League winners moved from second to first with revenue of $31.5 million, an increase of 43% in 2024. Now, treble winners Chelsea also cashed in on a successful year to be placed just behind Arsenal with a revenue of $28 million and pushing last year's leaders Barcelona into third. In total, the top 15 clubs generated a record $177.8 million, up 35.5% on the previous 12 months. Now, English clubs dominate for a second consecutive year with 8 women's Super League sides in the top 15. However, after a record-breaking 2023-2024 season, the study notes 5 teams reported a season-on-season drop in attendance. Now, Arsenal's memorable win over Barcelona in the Champions League final is only one of the reasons 2025 was indeed a profitable year for the club. At the same time, the Gunners have also invested in understanding with the fan base and also were the most well-attended team in the Women's Super League, topping 35,000 on 5 separate occasions. They have introduced a third-tier pricing to encourage repeat attendance, helping them, of course, achieve the highest match day revenue across all 15 clubs. Now, the Women's Super League rivals Chelsea had the biggest increase in revenue, though, up to 90% on 2024. That was powered mostly by generating $21 million in commercial revenue alone, more than any other side analysed. Similarly, with Barcelona did not lose that European final. They also still completed a domestic treble in Spain. Deloitte's knowledge, by the way, as well as inside lead Jennifer Haskell, said the increasing revenue in the women's game was down to both creativity and just how clubs are meeting the needs of their emerging fan base. And finally, governing body of Tennis Australia have defended the amount of prize money on offer at the Australian Open, as a twice Grand Slam champion Coco Gauff warned that the players would raise the pressure if their demands were not met. Now, the Australian Open hiked prize money to $74.56 million for the current tournament, bringing it ahead of last year's French Open, which stands at $65.42 million, as well as Wimbledon on $71.60 million, but short of the US Open purse of $90 million. Now, the world's top players rode to the Grand Slams for significant improvements in prize money in April of last year, and a number of players having expressed their dissatisfaction with the situation at Melbourne Park in the recent days. Tournament director Craig Tilley, however, said no players had approached him with any complaints about the Australian Open. American world number 1 Coco Gauff told reporters on Monday that she had not heard any concrete plans for action over pay, but said players would then raise the pressure if the demands were not met. It is 16:39 p.m. Central African time, and that's a wrap of your sports news this hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, do send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Mosibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. 60 years of broadcasting Africa to the world. Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Africa in business. Africa in business. Delivers key insights and real-time updates on Africa's growing markets with Thami Ngubeni. The African Perspective on Channel Africa.
Channel Africa.
Thank you to Chanduko Ligege and Musibudi Makura. They bring us to exactly 4:40 Central African time as we turn our focus now to European leaders who held an emergency meeting after US President Donald Trump threatened sweeping new tariffs on some NATO allies. That is, of course, unless Washington is allowed to buy Greenland. For more of this, here is a Reuters news report.
European leaders held an emergency meeting on Sunday after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened sweeping new tariffs on some NATO allies unless Washington is allowed to buy Greenland. The EU has rejected the demand as blackmail and is preparing retaliatory steps while urgently pushing for diplomacy. Officials say the bloc could impose counter tariffs on around $108 billion of U.S. goods, while also considering the use of a tougher anti-coercion tool that could restrict American access to European markets. The crisis is expected to dominate both the upcoming EU summit on Thursday and talks at the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, which Trump is due to attend. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez warned that any U.S. military move on Greenland would fracture NATO and be a big boost for the Kremlin.
First, because it would in some way legitimize Putin's invasion and his unilateral action and questioning of Ukraine's territorial integrity. And second, because I very much fear that if such an invasion of Greenland by the United States were to occur, it would spell the death certificate of NATO.
Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen said dialogue with Washington remained open through a new trilateral working group involving Denmark, Greenland, and the United States.
The talks were constructive and where we also decided to continue working on it and see if we could find a solution that leads to President Donald Trump abandoning the idea of owning Greenland. That secures Greenland's sovereignty, the Danish kingdom's territorial integrity, while at the same time accommodates reasonable U.S. expectations and requests. And that is what we agreed.
8 European nations issued a joint statement offering full solidarity with Denmark and Greenland and warning that tariff threats risk a dangerous downward spiral in transatlantic relations. The dispute has also unsettled markets, raising doubts over recent U.S. trade agreements with the EU and Britain. Monday morning trade in Asia saw the dollar dip against other major currencies, while gold and silver, often seen as safe havens, jumped to new record highs. Analysts say the crisis has now escalated into one of Denmark's most serious foreign policy challenges in decades, raising questions about NATO cohesion and Europe's ability to respond collectively. Public frustration is growing in Denmark and Greenland, where residents say they will not be pressured over territorial integrity.
I think he has lost his mind. I hope that there soon will be some more clever people in the States who will tell him, no, it's not going to work, this thing.
EU leaders say they remain willing to engage, but insist Europe will not be coerced. With Trump's February deadline for imposing the tariffs fast approaching, the next round of talks will determine whether the dispute eases or heads toward a broader confrontation.
That report by Reuters news agency taking us to 4:44.
From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Still coming up on Africa in Business this afternoon, we'll take a look at developments in Ethiopia, not only the latest from the International Monetary Fund, but also a new mediation or renewed mediation by the United States between Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia. Also coming up, our FNB slot. It is going to be our very first one for the year 2026, and we focus on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as well as the price of gold rising even in the midst of these geopolitical tensions. We'll be joined by investment research analyst at FNB, Stembile Bopepa. It's now 4:45. In just a moment, a focus on Ethiopia.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
The International Monetary Fund has approved a disbursement of approximately $261 million to Ethiopia. This follows the completion of the fourth review of the country's 48-month extended credit facility, the ECF program. The funds are aimed at alleviating balance of payment pressures and supporting budgetary needs amid ongoing economic reforms. Meanwhile, Egypt and Sudan have accepted a renewed U.S. initiative to mediate talks with Ethiopia to address the long-standing Nile River water dispute, which stems from the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Merid Fikur-Hannes, founder and CEO of Pragma Investment Advisory. Good to be talking to you once again, Merid. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Happy New Year too.
Happy New Year to you. So let's focus then on the IMF disbursement. How will these funds, which equate to around $261 million, support Ethiopia's ongoing economic reforms?
Yes. So, this is this is already a standing agreement between the IMF and then the Ethiopian authorities. Mind you that Ethiopia is under the IMF reform package for the next 4 years, starting from July 2024. So we are already on the 18 months under the reform, which is, Ethiopia has undergone into major macroeconomic reforms. One of it is floating of its currency, adjusting and restructuring its local debt, foreign debt, and then also setting up a new monetary policy and making sure that the macroeconomic reform is there. And then at the same time, IMF would also disperse $3.4 billion of this disbursement to alleviate the budget pressure. So as part of that, this disbursement is usually get to be dispersed as per the agreement on reviews, and as part of the fourth review, IMF, the team was satisfied in terms of what Ethiopia has already committed, and one of the major ones was to finalize the negotiation with the Eurobond holders, and also delivering other macroeconomic reforms. So as part of that, the board has approved $261 million of disbursement to the Ethiopian government.
So with Ethiopia's improved fiscal position, how is that going to impact and affect regional stability? And I ask this especially in light of the tensions that exist between Egypt and Sudan over the Nile.
Yes, yeah. So the tension between the Nile, over Nile between Ethiopia and Egypt is old as the pyramids itself, right? The two countries. Because of the GERD, the Ground Intervention Dam. There has been a continuous disagreement between Egypt and Ethiopia. However, now the recent development that you see is there's the push from White House in terms of to mediate the negotiation between Ethiopia and Egypt. But just mind you, right now the dam has been already being completed. There is up to 74 billion cubic of water reserves. It produce up to 5,135 megawatts. It's the biggest dam in Africa. However, in terms of the technicalities of how much water to release during the drought season, or all of that details, the two parties, Ethiopia and Egypt, has not agreed on. So that's what U.S. is trying to propose, and that's what Trump is proposing. But mind you, this is the GERD is being used again as a leverage on the American side, especially to push Egypt to become part of the Abraham Accord, which you can see that in the Middle East. There's a huge geopolitical development, and Egypt is part of that, and that's the intention from the American side. From the Ethiopian side, this technicality issue has been raised, and Ethiopia wants to do all of this technical negotiation under a new initiative called the Nile Basin Commission. So this is a Nile Basin Commission. It does not only include Ethiopia, but also other upstream and downstream countries, including especially the downstream countries such as Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, which also the Nile also comes from. Of course, the blue line comes from Ethiopia, but the white line comes from also the other riparian countries as well. So Ethiopia wants to do this. So it seems to be that the geopolitics of the Middle East is also catching up with the GERD as well.
So let's focus then a bit more on the Nile River water dispute. Trump has offered to resume the U.S. mediation efforts with Ethiopia in order to try and resolve this dispute. What are the potential economic consequences for both Egypt and Sudan if the Nile's water flow is disrupted due to the prolonged disputes?
Yes. Okay. So let me say this. If the water the flow of the water cannot be stopped. By the way, there has been any interruption so far, because Ethiopia has already finalized the dam and the reservoir has been captured. So that's not a problem. So still the river flows. Sudan gets what it gets, Egypt gets what it gets. But the question right now looms over, is if there is a drought, and then at the same time, if there is a drought, or if there is when there is because of evaporation, at least Ethiopia has to release some portion of the water in different seasons to Sudan and also Egypt. So that's the topic that the two parties have not could not come to an agreement yet, especially between Egypt and Ethiopia.
Right.
So still that's the case, but in terms of the flow of water, I mean, still there's no interruption there. In fact, Ethiopia wants to sell its power to Sudan, both Sudan, the North Sudan, and also South Sudan, which there is already a standing power purchase agreement is already there. But this is the missing link. I think that how much of water to disperse is still an issue. So America is coming in and they want to say, okay, you know what? They want to they want to preside over all these discussions.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that.
This has been offered earlier before as well.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that, Merid. We thank you so much for your insight. Very much appreciated. As the tensions continue and the U.S. now saying, I'm going to step in. We'll see where those negotiations go. Thank you, Merid Johannes. Thank you. He's the founder and CEO of Pragma Investment Advisory, and he leads us to a little bit of a preview, a sneak peek as to what Vue d'Afrique has in store for us on this Monday afternoon. A very good afternoon to you, Madame Joëlle.
Bonjour à toi aussi, Thami. Bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa. Alors, dans Vue d'Afrique, dans quelques minutes, dans notre magazine, nous parlerons de la prestation de serment de Mamadi Doumbouya en Guinée avec notre correspondant sur place. Nous parlerons également de l'Ouganda où le président Yoweri Museveni a été proclamé samedi vainqueur de l'élection présidentielle. Et en deuxième partie, nous reviendrons sur un rapport d'Oxfam qui alerte sur la stagnation de la lutte contre la pauvreté et la progression de l'extrême pauvreté en Afrique. Nous nous entretiendrons à ce sujet avec Fatine Ziassan, directrice d'Oxfam en Afrique, pour comprendre les enjeux et les solutions proposées avec Jolino Sungu. Bien sûr, en deuxième partie, nous reviendrons sur la finale de la CAN, le sacre du champion d'Afrique, ainsi qu'une enquête ouverte sur des actes jugés inacceptables pendant la compétition. C'est tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique. Merci, Thami.
Merci beaucoup. That's Joëlle coming up with Vue d'Afrique in just a moment.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
So in our first F&B slot for this year, we are going to be taking a look at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We'll look at the market performance, the gold prices, and also what to expect in the week that is to come as far as inflation and retail sales are concerned. For this conversation, we're joined on the line by investment research analyst at First National Bank, Stembile Bopela. A very good afternoon, Steb. Welcome to Africa in Business.
A very good afternoon, and pleasure to be on the show for the first time.
In 2026, right? Great to have you with us. Look, let's take a look at the market performance of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange today. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, I mean, the market has started off the week on a soft note after what has been an otherwise quite positive start to the year. And today, the markets, the JSE was down just below 10% or 10 basis points rather. But year to date, the all shares up just under 4%. So a lot of that we are seeing stemming from the strength that we've seen among the resources. Our market is quite heavy on the basic materials. Just historically, that's been our biggest export. So unsurprising in the commodity bull markets that we've seen play out. We've enjoyed such solid returns over the past year, specifically from the precious metals, which are up about 11% since the start of the year. The PGMs or the white metals really shining bright, but also gold being very well supported as well. Even today, we saw red screens across the board, but the resources, they bucked the negative trend and finished the day in positive territory, bucking the trend against the rest of the markets. And I mean, what's driving the negative mood isn't necessarily what's happening on the local front. There was very little by way of company news or sort of economic developments today. So the JSE, I think, is more so following in line with other international markets that have come under pressure.
Let's look at the performance of the Rand. At the moment, the Rand, it remains resilient, and this is despite the prevailing global risks. What is driving the strength for the currency?
Yeah, I mean, the rand is still very much considered a commodity currency. And so, as I mentioned earlier, our local markets is very commodities heavy or reliant. So the strong commodity prices that we've seen have helped the rand strengthen quite meaningfully. I mean, we're around 16 rand 40 against the dollar, which are levels that we last saw in 2022. So we've seen a very strong performance indeed. Of course, there's more to the story than that. The market is continuing to sort of reward South Africa's improved fiscal outlook, improving consumer and business conditions. There's been progress on the reforms in energy security, for one. You know, Eskom has turned a corner, but also the anti-corruption being some of the big sort of factors that have been influencing risk appetite towards our local economy. And so there's also been stable domestic inflation. That environment has created a more conducive sort of backdrop for the rand. And I think that's definitely been an attractive landscape for our local currency.
And as far as global equity markets are concerned, how are they responding to the trade uncertainty and the global risks?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we are seeing some softer performances across, you know, international markets. I mean, the old saying, if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, you know, that is still very much relevant. And we are seeing sort of the geopolitical tensions that we've seen heating up, specifically the events over the weekend, the Trump administration imposing tariffs against 8 European countries or threatening to impose tariffs against those European countries. That has not been met positively, of course. It's just reigniting some of the fears that were sparked last year around the tariffs and the potential implications to the rest of the market that those might have. And so we have seen equity markets across the board come under pressure. In Europe, the Euro Stoxx 600, which is a broad benchmark of the European market, that fell over 1% on the day. And really, again, it is just the geopolitical actions that we are seeing that have sort of reignited the fear in the market.
I'd like us, Thembile, just to wrap up really quickly with what is lying ahead for us as far as inflation and retail sales numbers are concerned for this week.
Yeah, so we are expecting inflation this week. Consensus is for inflation to remain well within the SARB's current target range, likely cooling towards the 3.5% level. If that does hold, it will back up the case for a more measured rate cutting cycle, sort of giving the SARB space to cut rates further. On the retail sales side, we know the holiday season is typically a strong period for retailers. And so, you know, markets are forecasting a rebound in retail activity for November, December. And so a strong number there would, I think, confirm that the SA consumer is in a better place and is finally starting to sort of recover.
Thank you so very much, Thembile Bopela, for the very first FNB wrap for 2026. Looking forward to chatting to you again soon. Thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's Thembile Bopela, Investment Research Analyst at FNB. She takes us to exactly 5 p.m. and that's how we wrap up Africa in Business for this Monday afternoon. Thank you to the entire team behind the scenes. Restez connectés as Vue d'Afrique comes on the airwaves.
Vue d'Afrique, un magazine des actualités en français sur Channel Africa. Rendez-vous du lundi au vendredi avec Joël Mouteba sur Channel Africa de 15h à 16h, temps universel. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Bienvenue dans cette nouvelle édition de Vue d'Afrique, votre magazine d'actualité en français sur Channel Africa. Nous émettons en direct de nos studios d'Oakland Park à Johannesburg, en Afrique du Sud. Et je suis Joël Mouteba à la présentation. Et tout de suite, voici les grandes lignes. En Guinée, le général Mamadi Doumbouya a officiellement été investi ce samedi 17 janvier comme président de la République. Nous parlerons de la fortune des milliardaires africains qui a progressé en 2025 4 fois plus vite qu'au cours des 5 années précédentes selon un nouveau rapport d'Oxfam. Et en Ouganda, le président Yoweri Museveni a été proclamé samedi vainqueur de l'élection présidentielle avec 71,65% des suffrages. Voilà donc quelques sujets qui seront développés au cours de ce magazine après le bulletin d'information de Joël